policy enforcement and decisioning have to be very local, but the policy itself that's going to be used in the policy decision engine, it can be pushed in. So it can be ministered somewhere else and then pushed in so that it basically is, the policy decisions running locally. And that addresses the performance concerns, which a lot of these SaaS applications are going to have in these situations.
So I guess that's the benefit of standard, right? Is that if
absolutely,
you set up a standard, then all the applications can kind of subscribe to the same standard, and you get greater adoption of this model.
Yep. Yes. I mean that, and again, this is not available now. This is still early. This is some of the evolution of AuthZEN and where it's sort of going to. But it's to enable some of these use cases where, a policy can be developed, and controlled by a customer organization and pushed into lots of different SaaS applications. So they all, so you all have individually different policy that you can use in those situations.
This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jim McDonald. I am not joined today by Jeff Stedman. Unfortunately, he was not able to make it today due to business travel. But I've got a great show lined up for you today. We're going to talk about adaptive authentication and fraud prevention. So if that's right up your alley, you tuned into the right episode. Before we get started, it's our tradition to go through our discount codes. I've got only 2 today, but they're big ones. If you're going to the European Identity and Cloud Conference, better known as EIC 2025, it's in Berlin. And the dates are May 6th through May 9th. We've got a code. It's IDAC 25 MKO. That gets you 25% off the conference rate. The second conference discount code we have is for Identiverse 2025. It's in Las Vegas. It's at the Mandalay Bay this year. So if you haven't been to Mandalay Bay, it's going to be exciting for that reason, but it's always one of the best conferences of the year. That's June 3rd through June 6th. We're going to have you use the code IDV25-IDAC25. That will get you 25% off. These 2 codes, by the way, you're not going to find better out there. So I get the temptation to go out to Google and look for discount codes. I'm just going to let you know ours is the best one available. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about adaptive authentication and fraud prevention. Joining me today is Patrick Harding. He's the Chief Product Architect at Ping Identity. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
Jim, thank you very much. Thanks for having me back. Appreciate it.
Yeah, really glad to have you here. Let me ask you a quick question. Are you going to be at Identiverse this year?
I am actually going to be at Identiverse, yes. Also, awesome. Probably going to be at EIC as well. So I'll be at both.
Oh, good. We can share a beer at one or both, or not share a beer, but have a beer at the same time in the same place.
Jim, I'll buy you a beer. How's that? Let's do that. All right.
And I don't have to share with anyone?
No, you can. It's all yours.
I'll take it on myself. Yeah, my girlfriend might argue with that. She might want me to share with her, but
there you go.
So, Patrick, it's kind of our tradition around here to ask, how did you get into identity? And did it choose you, or did you choose it?
Actually, so Jim, I'd say it's a little bit of both. Back in the day, late 90s, I was doing cybersecurity before it was called cybersecurity, actually, doing a lot of firewall infrastructure, network security infrastructure, things like that in the kind of the early days of the web at a company called actually Fidelity Investments in Boston. I quickly realized at that time that poking holes through firewalls kind of wasn't going to be the right approach to secure web interactions and stuff like that. So I ended up looking and thinking about kind of identity and, those sort of things. And actually, coincidentally, at around the same time, Scott McNealy, the CEO of Sun Microsystems, contacted the CEO at Fidelity and said, "Hey, Ned, there's this thing called Microsoft Passport that I'm sort of worried about, basically. And, think of it as centralizing all authentication on the web, owned and controlled by Microsoft. We don't think that's a good idea. We'd like you and a bunch of other companies to join us at this thing called Liberty Alliance and, come up with approaches to basically deal with that." Obviously, back at that point in time, 2001, 2002, Microsoft's reputation was very different than it is today, I would say. So Fidelity joined, I got involved, and that work at Liberty Alliance ended up being the foundations of what became SAML, or SAML 2, to be more specific. That work I did with SAML 2 led me to Ping Identity, where we started to do the first, federated single sign-on capabilities, dedicated federated single sign-on, and, here's me 20 years later, basically, still solving identity problems because, we're never finished, it seems, basically.
It's kind of a cool story. I kind of feel like you just said something like, so I was sitting there with Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, and we were kind of talking about, hey, what if everybody came to the table and voted for the leaders and like had that level of conversation? Because you just name dropped some heavy hitters in the beginning of, identity kind of becoming what it is. So yeah. I thought that was a pretty cool story. Put you right there as a founding father.
Yeah, well, it was early days, definitely, and it's kind of come a long way. Obviously, we'll talk later about the evolution of SAML and OpenID Connect and stuff like that. But yeah, there's been a lot going on over the years.
Yeah. So every once in a while, I like to do a topic that you kind of feel like, all right, we've been talking about this for a decade or more, maybe 2 decades, and it's kind of old hat. But we got to remember, new people are coming into the industry and trying to kind of wrap their brains around some of this. And I had a recent conversation with one of my colleagues, and he was asking me about authentication, and more specifically, adaptive authentication. So he had a SaaS application that he had a particular part of this SaaS application that is kind of an admin section. And he wanted to force users, when they access this part of the application, to give a multi-factor authentication. So it's kind of like the classic use case for adaptive, I think.
Yep.
And so I was thinking this would be a great topic for a podcast. And then you and I started to collaborate about having you on. I thought you'd be the perfect guest to talk about this. So I wanted to start, Patrick, with, what are some of the questions that you would ask this friend of mine, in terms of trying to uncover what he was trying to do?
So what he's trying to do is something we used to be able to do quite easily, actually. Back in the days when we were, when organizations were running these applications themselves in the data center, we had much more flexibility in terms of being able to apply policy, essentially, to different things. And I would say I would point at the WAM products, the web access management products back in the day, like the SiteMinders, the Oracle Access Managers, the Sun had a product in that world. Everybody had a product in that world. They were actually very good at helping companies actually do this. We can talk about why, but with the evolution of SaaS, SaaS really emerged where the point of SaaS was that it's going to be easier and simpler for you to use this application, Mr. Enterprise. But we're going to take away a lot of flexibility. All right. We're not going to give you all the bells and whistles you might have had if you were able to run this same application on premise. And sort of, you're going to get what you get and don't get upset, as I used to say to my kids, basically. So, that's really, the fundamental sort of issue here is that SaaS applications have not done a lot over the years to cater to, different enterprise requirements that might emerge on a case-by-case basis because they don't give you a lot of flexibility.
I kind of had the same thought pattern that you just went over there, where when you had what we call legacy authentication or web authentication, web authn systems, you'd have
Yep.
essentially some sort of filter in front of your
Yep.
web server that would examine every request that you're making, and you could set a policy that it would
Yeah.
look at that HTTP and say, you're trying to access /admin. We're going to kick it back and determine whether or not you're authenticated at the right level. And if not, we're going to step you up. Absolutely.
Yep.
That's where I started as well. And then I started to think, well, there's the legacy piece, but there's also a lot of applications that are now single page applications, and you can't always just do URL filtering.
Yeah.
So it's that too.
So I think so in terms of that, really, so where we are today, I think so we don't see a lot of adaptive authentication being enabled on SaaS applications. We still tend to see it though on, I'll say, and so when SaaS applications are more focused on, for enterprise and for workforce, things like that. But we see it in customer-facing applications where organizations are building and developing and deploying those applications themselves. Because, to me, adaptive authentication is actually a authorization or policy enforcement problem. You basically need to apply policy at certain points in the application where you want to make a decision on, okay, do I want to essentially re-authenticate, step up the authentication, whatever it might be at this point on this transaction, essentially. And as you said, when we had WAM products, web access management products, we could use a web agent or a proxy as a place to do that enforcement. We could check a certain URL, things like that. You can also do that with APIs as well. API gateways can do the same sort of thing, which is how you might address it with single page apps that might be talking against APIs as opposed to sort of legacy sort of, web interactions and stuff like that. So
Right.
We can do adaptive auth on applications, SIAM applications that are built and deployed by, different, by our customers, but much more difficult now to do it with SaaS applications because we don't have the ability to do that enforcement so easily, essentially.
You're kind of at the mercy of the provider of that application, right? The service provider.
Absolutely. So the one thing they've done is they've enabled, single sign-on. All right. So they've basically given you flexibility to control how authentication is done. And we do that with things like SAML, SAML mostly with SaaS applications. And that allows you to sort of do adaptive authentication at login time because you control, you control the login essentially as an organization. So you can basically make a decision at that point based on different factors about what level of authentication you might want at login. But once the user is inside, is post authentication interacting with the SaaS application directly, very few SaaS apps give you the controls, the policy controls to allow you to make policy decisions at different points in the applications for different reasons.
Anywhere other than the front door, right?
Pretty well, yeah. So there's been a sort of attempts and efforts at that. So if you look at what was called the CASB market, like the cloud access security brokers, I think they were called, they've acted as proxies in front of SaaS applications. So there's an element of attempting to apply policy there, but that tends to be more sort of risk-based, where if they think this is a risky device now, they might automatically push you out to get you re-authenticated. It doesn't allow you to very easily do policy that says, all right, on this transaction type with this entitlement in this situation, this is high risk, and I want you to re-authenticate. Think of the analogy to a banking application, all right, where like we have a banking application, and they want to set policy that says, okay, if it's high risk, if I think the user's high risk, then re-authenticate them, adapt the authentication. But they have other policies that says, if this is a payment, all right, automatically re-authenticate them. Or if this is a payment and it's over $10,000, re-authenticate them. So there's certain, application transaction types that can get quite granular where they look, that are considered high risk. And not every organization is the same. Not every bank's the same. Not every customer of Salesforce is the same in their risk profile. And that's where we've lost that level of customization on the risk policies that people might want to put in place, I would say.
Yeah. And you're getting into an area that I really want to explore. But you mentioned something earlier that got me thinking about, okay, so if adaptive authentication is hard to do at kind of that next level, which I always call that coarse-grained authentication or coarse-grained authorization.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
And it seems like this, kind of SAML IDP model really works at like the resource being like the front door for the application. Like you either have access or you don't have access. Maybe we're going to send some attributes in the payload. But for the most part, based on how you come in, and you were talking about the device looks risky, but there's more context to it, right? At least kind of the way I conceptualize it in my head is you've got the actor, which has a context. It could be the device. It could be where the person's coming from. It could be, several different attributes about that actor, and they're trying to access a resource. And at some level, and I don't know if it's just marketing buzz or if this is the way it really works, is that the actor has a risk score. Maybe that score of like, very low or very high, however it works. And the resource has a risk score. And as long as the resource matches or is better than if the actor is less risky than what's required to access the resource, they get right in. But if not, they get challenged. Yep. Is that kind of the way it's working in like the modern actor or modern description for adaptive authentication?
Yeah, somewhat. I just think that with SaaS apps, there's from what we see, there's just limited controls right now. I think, and I don't think we can really apply the agent model or the proxy model very well. And it's also very difficult. We've externalized authentication from these SaaS applications, but externalizing authorization is actually much, much more difficult. All right.
Yeah.
And the SaaS applications themselves really don't want to do that as much as possible. But one of the things the SaaS applications have done is they've exposed APIs to allow you to programmatically control entitlements. All right. Things that you're allowed to do. And that's something we never had on traditional on-prem applications. So, we never had that level of programmatic control where I can call an API to adjust the entitlements. It used to be you had to go into the database and change them manually or go through some, weird web console to do it and stuff like that. So what we can actually think about doing now as an alternative to this actually is to think about it as, your standing privileges of what you can do in this SaaS application are fairly limited, and that you might be granted privileges to do certain things, for periods of time. So as I mentioned, quite often when you want to do adaptive auth, it might be on higher risk transactions. Like I want to download the financial data for the company, or, I want to approve a money transfer of X, things like that. So you could actually think about this now to say, all right, maybe by default, I'm not allowed to do this. And I have to request permission basically with basically just-in-time access, where I request permission for this entitlement. It gets approved, and then I'm able to do this for some period of time, maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and then it's taken away from me, basically. So it's another way to think about how to control and limit risk, essentially, which is what this is all about, is limiting risk on what people can do in these applications, essentially. So it's just a slightly different approach, but it works within the constructs of what SaaS applications allow you to do right now, essentially, if they have this API-based access to control entitlements.
I want to get into the other scenario that you're talking about. You were giving that banking example, and further, I kind of like go back to my original example of talking with this colleague. He actually wanted to do more than just protect this admin application. You wanted to say, well, can I take it to the next level? And I'm going to make up an example that there's these workers from France, and if somebody goes in and wants to access their account, that within the admin application, actually, if they want to access their account or change their account, that's when we would kick in an adapter. So in other words, we would trigger that risk score based on an action, and that action might be based on the data. So it's kind of like, if you're transferring $10,001, it gets flagged. If you're transferring 10,000, it doesn't. But it's based on the data and some kind of policy or rule set.
Yep.
That seems to me like that's advanced fraud analytics. That's more than your typical IDP is going to achieve for you, right? There's some kind of additional system that is kind of examining that process. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, unless the application itself, like a Salesforce, I'm talking about workforce applications now, like a Salesforce or a ServiceNow or a Workday, unless they build that in directly into their applications, they're going to have to take those requests from customers and sort of add that capability, basically. And not a lot of them are doing that. Where just because what is considered risky for different customers is different. Basically, the fact is that in this case it was France. France is a big deal. They want to have different policies because it's a French user and a non-French user. That might not apply for other customers. What I think can be done and what's evolving is standards that allow us to externalize policy from these SaaS applications. The SaaS applications might make the policy decisions and the enforcement themselves, but the policy itself, as opposed to actually, creating it inside the admin console of Salesforce based on what they can do, there are opportunities to externalize that and use standards like emerging standards like AuthZEN, AuthZEN, I should say, AuthZEN,
right?
AuthZEN, yes, as a mechanism to build those policies externally and then push them into the applications, essentially. So that starts to give you the flexibility of, all right, different policies can be written by different customers, but they can be enforced by the applications and enforced locally, basically, in that situation. And that gives you more flexibility.
So the application winds up reaching out to this external process. I was wondering if it was actually like some kind of proxy that data would.
I would say it's working the other way. One of the things when you talk about centralizing authorization is that if you think of, there's policy enforcement and policy decisioning, and basically those things generally need to work very fast. All right, you can't be calling out over the internet for every policy decision to be made. You can't be phoning home. Like Salesforce can't call back to their customer for every policy decision to be made. Essentially, it's just too slow. So policy enforcement and decisioning have to be very local, but the policy itself that's going to be used in the policy decision engine, it can be pushed in. So it can be ministered somewhere else and then pushed in so that it basically is, the policy decisions running locally. And that addresses the performance concerns, which a lot of these SaaS applications are going to have in these situations.
So I guess that's the benefit of standard, right? Is that if you set up the standard, then all the applications can kind of subscribe to the same standard, and you get greater adoption of this model.
Yes, I mean that. And again, this is not available now. This is still early. This is some of the evolution of AuthZEN and where it's sort of going to. But it's to enable some of these use cases where a policy can be developed, and controlled by a customer organization and pushed into lots of different SaaS applications. So they all, so you all have individually different policy that you can use in those situations.
I'm kind of getting the sense from this conversation that it's really like the benefit of a SaaS application is that it's easy to get integrated with initially. You can provide the services and a pretty good level of security, at least from an authentication standpoint, by integrating into your IDP. The downside is that if you want to get real fine grained, there's only so much that you can do. So that's kind of where I summarize where we are so far. But something that's in the back of my head is also you've got SAML 2 as a methodology to integrate. You've got OpenID Connect. And I'm wondering if there is, if the ability to handle authorization is part of the reason why you would choose one over the other. Is there a major advantage to integrating with OpenID Connect versus SAML when it comes to this whole topic that we're talking about and being able to either drive adaptive authentication or, have more control over authorization?
So it's interesting. I think it's interesting how SAML has become sort of the de facto default SSO standard for enterprise SaaS applications. And that was originally driven by Google and Salesforce adopting it back in, almost 20 years ago. And generally speaking, most SaaS vendors now kind of adopt that by default because they know that most of their customers are going to have a SAML IDP capability. But there hasn't really been much innovation happening in SAML for the last 10, 15 plus years. It kind of works. It does its thing. Where we are starting to see innovation still is in the OAuth and OpenID Connect world. And even though I'd say today OpenID Connect doesn't offer any major advantages, probably the one major one is it's kind of easier to set up and configure. And you can avoid some of the complexity around certificate management and stuff like that because it can be more dynamic in its nature. That, some of the innovation emerging there, any innovation we do is going to emerge in those areas. So that's why I believe AuthZEN is actually part of is happening within the constructs of the OpenID Foundation. All right. So it's going to be closer to OpenID Connect than ever it's going to be to SAML. So definitely, as we evolve to some of these newer protocols to address problems, existing problems, they're all happening in that OpenID Connect oriented world. I don't think there's ever going to be a prereq that you need OpenID Connect, but it's all happening there, and I think we'll evolve there over time. Most generally speaking, any customer today that has a IDP that supports SAML, that IDP is also going to support OpenID Connect as well. So it's not like it's more the SaaS vendors themselves choosing to build something beyond SAML, given that that's been the default for so long.
So it's the advantages that there are today, but it's also where everything is heading. I shouldn't say where everything is heading, but if you're expecting innovations, especially like things to do with AuthZEN and kind of, let me just say it easily, where things are heading. If you have the choice between SAML and OIDC, choose OIDC. I think you made the point earlier, though, that, if you look at a basket of SaaS applications, it's more likely that the majority support SAML. There's still, I always find it like amazing when there's an enterprise grade application that doesn't even support SAML, or that they charge to integrate via SAML.
I was going to mention that there's two things actually. So one thing we've seen over the last few years is that a lot of larger organizations still have a lot of, I'll call them on-premise applications or applications that might be now deployed in their cloud infrastructure, basically as cloud native, like running in that customer's AWS environment or GCP environment or Azure environment. So, I'll just say it's a derivative of on-prem. It just happens to be in their cloud. they still want single sign-on to those applications. And actually what we've seen there is, 15 years ago, they might have used a web access management product. They've actually instead now shifted over to support OpenID Connect. So you're seeing OpenID Connect used for those sort of on-prem cloud native applications that the enterprise is using, but it's quite often SAML for the SaaS applications. So I could definitely see SaaS applications evolving to OpenID Connect as well, just to make it consistent across the organization, actually.
Do you find
so that's definitely happening.
Do you find that the level of effort to, let's say, you had some application that 10, 15 years ago you wanted to quote unquote webify, and you had a consulting firm come in, they built this app. It's not integrated even with SAML, but now it's time. It's like maybe you have it behind a reverse proxy, but you say it's not going anywhere. You want to get reverse proxy out of your environment, and you say, okay, well, I could convert it to SAML or OIDC. Is there a significant difference in the amount of effort to do one over the other? And is that driving developers' decisions a lot of times?
Yeah, traditionally, we learned a lot from SAML. The OpenID Connect is definitely a lot simpler. Because we learn a lot. There were certain mistakes and things we did in SAML that, we chose to fix in OpenID Connect. And actually now with OpenID Connect, there are servers and even, web agent plugins and proxy plugins like Nginx plugins to, OpenID Connect enable your applications. Like a guy that used to work for me, Hans, built the Apache, the Apache and the Nginx mod OpenID Connect as a plug-in to Apache that you can basically use to OpenID Connect your applications. So it's a lot, it's a lot lower barrier to entry to have your applications support those protocols right now. So there's really no reason they shouldn't, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to go back to your point though, about, SaaS applications now charging for SAML, and what completely freaks me out here is that I've heard more and more SaaS vendors are charging for their enterprise grade features. I'll say that you've got to pay extra for them, and those enterprise grade features include SAML single sign-on. But now there's companies emerging that are saying, hey, we'll give you single sign-on to your SaaS applications, but do it in a way that you don't have to pay the SaaS vendor to support it. And the way they're solving this is actually through password vaulting. All right, which is basically goes back to what we were doing 20 years ago in terms of password vaulting people to get access to these applications. We've now gone back to it because people don't want to have to pay for single sign-on anymore through things like SAML and stuff like that. So it's kind of, I don't know, kind of annoying anyway.
There's a website called SSO.tax. It's kind of the single sign-on wall of shame.
Okay, I had actually even heard of that. That's interesting. I've got to go check that out. But yeah, this is like it, you try and do the right thing and, capitalism gets in the way. I'll say that.
So Patrick, in the future, I keep hearing about these AI agents, and they're going to play a pretty heavy role in terms of how we get our work done. And I think adaptive authentication winds up playing a role in that because we wind up delegating work to them, right? So they're authenticating on our part. They're essentially, pretending they're us or getting work done for us. And obviously there's the potential that they will be seen as robots, bad code, malicious code, whatever you want to call it. Let's keep it basic and first start with this concept of AI agents. What are AI agents? And then feel free to kind of go off on what I just said, whether I was right or wrong. How does this topic of adaptive authentication, fraud prevention play into, this AI agent future?
Sure. So We've been thinking a lot about AI agents over the last probably 12 months and the impact they're going to have. And the impact's going to be huge. And I don't think people quite understand yet how big an impact they're going to have, honestly. Um, we kind of didn't touch on it earlier, but, one of the key points around adaptive auth is the fact that, it might not be policy-based, it might be risk-based. If you get a risk score back from your fraud system, you might choose to adjust how you authenticate. That's a very traditional sort of model. And those risk and fraud systems quite often are looking to detect bots and stuff like that to prevent ATO attacks and things like that. So then, as we evolve into, the notion of AI agents, think of, to me, AI agents are different because they are processes that can actually, reason and dynamically change over time. So unlike a traditional computer process where you have a certain set of inputs and you're going to get the same outputs every time, AI agents evolve, and the inputs one day will drive different outputs over time as they dynamically learn. They reason. They get smarter over time, stuff like that. So a lot changes with the way you think about an AI agent. So AI agents are going to sort of appear in a couple of different ways. Where I think it gets interesting is when an AI agent can actually interact with a GUI, like the GUI that's on your on your laptop, and it appears like a human. All right. I mean, this is like what the operator tool from OpenAI does. It'll literally drives the browser, and it does that while it actually, basically, tries to complete a task or a set of tasks. So now, if you can imagine, you've got a AI agent on your desktop that's basically looking to do things, automatically add things to your calendar, automatically update Salesforce with certain data that you got. That's workforce examples. In consumer examples, it could be automatically search across 3 websites looking for a cheap pair of jeans and then buy those jeans, stuff like that, whatever it might be. We now have to basically, AI agents are going to be used. How do websites differentiate an AI agent from a bot? All right. Where traditionally we've thought of bots to be bad. So we have to have ways to basically distinguish an AI agent from a bot. And then we have to have ways for that AI agent to be able to authenticate to that website, all right, such that it can do things on behalf of the user. And obviously adaptive fits into this in many ways, because we're going to adapt basically understanding whether this is a bot or an agent or a human. And if it's an agent, we want to handle authentication differently, things like that. In the case where the AI agent now needs to authenticate, the last thing we want to do is have the AI agent essentially impersonate the user. And by that, I mean just use the credentials that the user generally uses. So I don't want the AI agent to basically just take my ID and password and log in as me. All right. What we're creating at that point is essentially what a lot of the in the banking world, the Yodleys and the Mints of the world did when they did screen scraping to basically use my banking credentials and log into the bank, screen scrape stuff, and return it. The banks hated that. And, there's all sorts of security risks associated with that. And AI agents, if we don't fix this or address this, are just going to do this, 10 orders of magnitude more. It's going to happen everywhere. So what we really need to, address or push for is the notion of delegation. All right. I, Patrick, am going to delegate this AI agent to go do this on my behalf. So that means applications that want to be kind of agent aware need to sort of support this notion of delegation where, I can delegate responsibility to this agent acting on my behalf to do things, basically. And, the agent still has to authenticate itself, but it can do that, we can start to do that in ways that doesn't require, similar to the ways we might have done this with sort of traditional OAuth and stuff like that, where you you consent to an OAuth client to act on my behalf to do things like that, basically. So that's what we've got to evolve to. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you think about what you talked about there with systems. So the security problem is systems that are meant to detect bots, while the AI agents are bots. So they're doing their job by saying, you can't proceed, but they're good bots. So now the question is, how do you tell the good bots from the bad bots?
So we're actually looking at ways where a website can advertise and let a AI agent know that, hey, if you're an AI agent, go do this. All right. And it basically, it kind of it tells the AI agent what to do, essentially. And it would be distinct from what a human would be doing if they're interacting with the website in that way as well. So it's challenging. And actually it's going to force a lot of organizations to have to update the way and how they think about interacting with these things, basically, to support this. If they want to, take advantage of it.
I heard one of these quote unquote outlandish statements. What will be the first one-person company worth $1 billion? And the idea is you could have agents or bots running your entire company. You can imagine actually the example that you brought up, which is you go out, look for the cheapest pair of jeans. Now say you're doing that on a wholesale level. You're buying them. Maybe you're warehousing virtually and you're shipping virtually. So you're taking orders online and you're just moving these items and taking payments, and your whole company is basically bots.
Yes. Well, the other example here is, I gave an example of where a user is kind of, bringing their own agent, and it's going to do work on my behalf. But there are also examples of agents that are being created that are kind of more autonomous, and they're acting as kind of digital workers, where they're autonomous off basically independently doing things, for an organization. And there might be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of these digital workers that are going off performing tasks. Those agents likely are going to need identities of their own, because to me, they're no different to a human user, especially if they're interacting with systems that humans interact with. And now the digital worker, that agent as a digital worker, is doing it instead. Those applications are going to have to actually know, all right, this digital worker has an identity. It's going to authenticate to me. All right. It's going to be given a set of entitlements to do things. It's going to, the entitlements and its identity is going to have to be, there's lifecycle management around that. It's going to have to be, granted and taken away. Access is going to have to be approved. It's going to act very similar to the way we think about kind of IGA today for human users and what they can do, but we're going to apply it at massive scale for these digital workers that are essentially just AI agents in these situations. So there's a whole other class of stuff that's happening there, sort of inside the organization as well, in terms of what's happening too. So again, it's all coming, and I know a lot of people are thinking about this and talking about this, but I think it's going to come a lot faster than we might imagine, actually.
So, do people wind up being replaced by the AI agents in the end? Do we serve any purpose if the AI agents can do it all themselves? I know it almost seems like a silly question, but people brought it up a long time ago. And every once in a while, you hear somebody say, I'm not going to have a job in 2 or 3 years because this does all the, you look at like, say, the co-pilot assistant or the transcriber in a Teams meeting now. You don't need anybody to keep notes. In fact, usually the notes that you're going to get from the Teams meeting are way better than a person could keep anyway.
So I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think this boils down to efficiency. All right. We are going to make people are going to become much more efficient in what they do if they have access to these AI agents to essentially do, the repetitive stuff effectively that we've done done before. And I'm not saying that AI agents won't require, at least for some period of time, sort of a human in the loop before we're ready to actually just give them full autonomy. I imagine that humans are going to be in the loop, approving things that an AI agent sort of says, does, acts on, creates, whatever, that'll exist for a while. So, that doesn't go away. But I think people will just become more efficient. And I don't think it's any different to when, the personal computer emerged and everybody thought the personal computer was going to replace all sorts of, roles and jobs and stuff like that. The stenographer, the typing pool, whatever it might have been. Yes, they get replaced, but I still think there's, it's not like there's all these people out of work. People's skills evolve. People learn how to use these things. They'll become more efficient. They've got to embrace it and go with the times, sort of thing, in that regard.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It's like you can't prevent progress, right? The progress is going to happen. So you have to position yourself on the right side of it. You don't want to be the person who's constantly falling behind, like the person who went around and lit all of the street lights before there were electrical lights. If they stuck to it and maybe they were lighting the last few, eventually they have no skills for the future.
Yeah. I'd say, look, this is something that Andre has shared with me multiple times over the years. Andre, the CEO of Ping, that capitalism, and organizations are hyper focused on that. They will find and drive efficiency, constantly, or good organizations will, and capitalism drives efficiency. Basically, everybody's looking to do things faster, cheaper, better, all the time. All right. And it's constantly moving in that direction. And this is just the most recent example of it, I think, that we're going to see. So, yeah.
Let me ask you a question, Patrick. If you had a son or daughter who was in college, what would you tell them to learn right now? And don't tell me art history, because that's cheating.
So, yeah, what's interesting? I've asked this a couple of people at Ping as well. And the one thing that none of my kids have gone into, which I went into, was computer science. So my kids didn't go into computer science. One of them is doing pre-med. My older son that graduated, did actually business and data analytics. And my younger son's doing kind of business and doesn't really know yet. So I'm actually, to me, honestly, learning the business side of things gives you the opportunity to understand how to run a business, how to build a business, be a little bit more entrepreneurial. All right. Because you understand how businesses function. And I still think that's going to be necessary. People who understand how to operate and run a business is always going to be needed, irrespective of what that business is. And I think that's just a great set of skills to have. I'm way more concerned if I was, about going into computer science now, because I was a software developer and I wasn't a very good software developer, perfectly willing to admit it. All right. And I don't think I would survive through what it means to be a developer now, given how much more efficient developers can be made using things like, what's it called? Copilot and stuff like that.
If you're a lazy developer, you might be able to get by, right? You figure out all the ways to get all your work done by doing nothing.
That's true, but I just think the number of, again, efficiency is going to drive that, developers are going to become more efficient, and therefore we're not going to need as many developers to develop the code. And the other thing is, look, what's a developer really doing? A developer is translating business analyst type requirements into a language that a machine understands. If I can now just use natural language to tell the machine what I want to happen, do I really need that person in the middle that's turning, those requirements into code? I can just give the AI the requirements. So it now becomes sort of more a case of, all right, maybe people should be learning about prompt engineering and understanding how to actually define these requirements in a way that the AI can use it to actually build the applications itself, essentially. So it just becomes a different language you have to learn, essentially, to be able to, develop the applications that people want to use.
Yeah. I've been encouraging my son to do the prompt engineering and really get good at that. He's a sophomore in a cybersecurity degree program. And I wouldn't say he's a lot of a tinkerer. He was a tinkerer. Early in his years, he was setting up his own PC for doing video games and trying to figure out how to, get the fancy sword in his game without actually doing the work. So, but I would love to see him tinker with getting the open source code and seeing what he could do, seeing what kind of data sources he could plug it into and figure out how it works, because I think that's the skill that businesses are going to be very hungry for.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't think that, I talked to him about, like, are they teaching you this in school? And he said, no. And I believe him, because I remember going out when he was, looking for colleges and asking questions about things such as cloud computing. And it's like, these professors, they were behind where we are even in the business world. And I was like, man, oh man, I can't believe you guys aren't like on the cutting edge of this stuff. Maybe it's just the schools we were looking at. I don't know. Yep.
That's a problem. I agree. But yes, I think, learning and understanding how to translate, so, and this gets back to the business side of things. It's like being able to translate the business requirements instead of actually into code as we know it, but into, to basically tell an AI what you need, I think is where this evolves to over time, essentially. Yeah. There'll still be need for hardcore developers, obviously, but I just think a lot of organizations aren't going to need as many of them. It'll look very different in 10 years' time, as an example.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But Patrick, you've been super generous with your time. We had a great conversation today. I know you're out there on LinkedIn, so I sent you an invite to get connected. I don't know how you weren't connected, given you were on the show before, but I'm sure other people after the show will be sending you invites. I already get a number of invites per day, and I love it. I want to talk to all of our listeners and get to know you all. And a great way to get to know people is through the conferences. Mention we've got discount codes for EIC and Identiverse, so please make sure to take advantage of those. And Patrick, I'd like to go out today with a lighter note question. Given those two conferences, EIC in Berlin and Identiverse in Vegas, what are your tips for each of those cities for whether it's a first-time conference goer or maybe somebody who's been there a few times? If you've got any secret nuggets for each one of those?
I've spent a lot more time at Identiverse over the years than EIC, so I'll sort of focus on that. It's honestly, you got to get it outside your comfort zone and just engage and talk to people. And whether it's at might be a lunch or a breakfast, sit down at a table where you don't know anybody, start talking to people. Everybody starts in the same situation where they don't know a lot of people in the community. But I've always found the identity community to be very open and embracing of new people and old timers, essentially. So that to me is the key here. Everybody was in your place at some point in their career and felt the same way. So, don't be afraid just to open up and reach out and ask questions and introduce yourself and stuff like that, essentially, is the key. The same thing applies at EIC as well with Martin and those guys too. So, I would say the same thing there as well.
Yeah, this is going to be my first time at EIC. I've been to Germany before, but never Berlin. I hear that, it's a very lively city. Of course, there's a lot of history there, a lot of places to check out, like the Berlin Wall. And, heck, I'm not going to do as good of a job. If you're interested in looking for sites to see, YouTube, Google, there's tons of information out there. I have actually been to Las Vegas probably 20 or more times. My biggest pro tip is to pace yourself. I mean, especially if you're somebody who likes to have a good time, you get to Vegas, if it's your first time in Vegas and all those lights are on, and you go into, go through the casino. They just have a way with all the bells and the lights, and they pump extra oxygen into the room, makes you feel energized. And you should enjoy that.
My recommendation with Vegas is don't end up inside for 3 days like I have a couple of times. Get out and get some fresh air in the middle of it if you can, because I've inadvertently spent 3 days indoors in Vegas and never saw the sun. So
yeah, that's good advice. I've never done the whole 3 days indoors, even though Jeff has told me he's done that a few times. I'm not like when I was a kid, I wanted to be outside around the clock, but as I've gotten older, I've gotten lazier about it. But I think after a certain amount of time, I'd just go stir crazy indoors. And so my advice is pace yourself. Don't try to have all your fun up front. Kind of, a little bit at a time. There's a lot of like after hour parties, but that doesn't have to mean you have to be out until midnight every night, because the shows, take place in the morning. You get off to a fresh start, have breakfast, get in there, be mentally aware, engage. Try also to break away from work for a little bit, because yes, I understand, and I've fallen into this trap many times over the years where you're right in the middle of like a hectic project. But if you travel all the way out to Las Vegas and you go to two of the sessions or something like that, you're really going to regret it. You've got to try to find a way to get up early, do your calls, maybe save some of the calls till later today, maybe take a break in the middle, but make sure you're going to a number of the sessions. Otherwise, you're going to end up being disappointed in the end.
Yep. Good advice.
Yeah. So that's what I've got for you for this time. Patrick, again, thanks for joining us. For everybody out there, find us on the web, idacpodcast.com, and our YouTube channel is idacpodcast.tv. That'll drop you right into our YouTube. Again, love hearing from everybody on LinkedIn, so find us there. And thanks again, Patrick. Until next time, everyone.
Thanks, Jim. Bye.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.